To me and everybody else, he never aged. Richard kept himself in tremendous physical condition.
Richard Jaeckel built a career on grit, guts, and unshakable presence.
You've seen his face 100 times. Gritty, weathered, unforgettable. But chances are, you never knew his name. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Hollywood legends, delivered lines that hit harder than bullets, and vanished before the spotlight ever found him. This isn't a story about a fall from grace. It's something stranger and sadder. How could someone who gave everything to the screen leave with barely a whisper? Behind the roles, behind the silence, there's a truth Hollywood doesn't like to talk about. Richard Jaeckel was 70 when it ended, but what happened before that is where the real heartbreak lives. The invisible icon. In the world of film and television, there exists a rare kind of actor, one whose face feels like an old friend, even if you've never learned their name. Richard Jaeckel was that kind of actor. For over 50 years, his image became etched into the collective memory of American audiences, appearing in gritty war epics, dusty westerns, and urban dramas. You may not have remembered his name when the credits rolled, but chances are you remembered the eyes, tired but alert, intense but human. He was a man you believed in because he didn't seem like he was acting. He simply was. And yet, despite his relentless presence across generations of film and television, Jaeckel never achieved name recognition. He was a constant without being celebrated, a familiar face without a spotlight. Throughout his career, Jaeckel played the kind of roles that held stories together from the inside out. He wasn't cast to dazzle. He was cast to ground. While marquee names drew the audiences, Jaeckel made the scenes believable. He was the soldier who looked like he'd seen combat, the deputy who knew the town's dark secrets, the friend who never betrayed the hero. His characters added texture and emotional ballast, allowing lead actors to shine brighter, but at the cost of his own visibility. Rarely was his name used to promote a film. He didn't appear on magazine covers and rarely in interviews. Even in films like The Dirty Dozen or sometimes A Great Notion, where his performances were central, marketing materials placed him firmly in the background. Just not an accident, but a type of repetition showing how Hollywood usually, as a practice, promotes spectacular over serious. Jaeckel did not try to brand himself. He did not court controversy, hire publicists, or fashion his image in front of cameras. He allowed his work to speak for itself. In a world that openly thrives on visibility, such quiet devotion finds itself almost always overlooked. While his contemporaries were acknowledged and fame followed their work, Jaeckel remained in an almost gray-shaded corner, respected but forgotten. His name barely figured on award cards. Much to the award show's loss, he always delivered performances that gave every production extra gravity. Perhaps the most moving part of Richard Jaeckel's legacy is the fact that his invisibility stemmed not from a dearth of talent, but rather from the very element that made him great. That ability to inhabit a character so thoroughly meant that audiences saw only the individual on screen, and never the actor. Ironically, perhaps the too real genius that he brought to his parts cost him recognition, which was handed out to others with far flashier, ungainly performances. And yet, his presence certainly was felt. There, always, real, the invisible icon holding things together, even if his name sometimes got left behind. He wasn't discovered in a casting call or groomed for stardom, and the way he got in says everything about the kind of actor he'd become, breaking in without breaking rules. Richard Jaeckel's entrance into Hollywood was anything but conventional. At just 17, he wasn't pounding the pavement for auditions or networking through casting agents. Instead, He was working as a mailboy at 20th Century Fox, sorting envelopes and delivering messages. It was a job meant to pay the bills, not launch a career. But fate intervened. A casting director saw something in the wiry, sharp-eyed teenager that couldn't be manufactured, something raw and real. He was offered a part in Guadalcanal Diary, a major World War II film. Despite having no acting experience, that single twist of fate launched a career that would span more than 5 decades. Unlike many of his peers, Jaeckel didn't arrive with a polished resume, a famous last name, or a carefully crafted image. He arrived with nothing but authenticity. That authenticity would become his trademark. While Hollywood has long rewarded charm, good looks, and polish, Jaeckel remained the antithesis of that mold. He never tried to shape himself into a star. He didn't change his voice, his face, or his demeanor to chase fame. There were no cosmetic makeovers, no fake smiles, no PR spin. He came as he was, a blue-collar kid with a rough edge and a quiet intensity. And that worked to his advantage. He wasn't pretending to be a soldier, a cowboy, or a street cop. He was those roles. Audiences didn't see an actor reaching for realism. They saw someone who looked like he'd lived the life. Directors came to rely on that quality because it lent credibility to every project he joined. Had it been in the opposite direction, Jaeckel's lack of training could very well have been considered an asset. He did not study technique or theatrical gewgaws in approaching the role, relying instead on instinct, observation, and an understanding of human nature. Method realism worked best for him when portraying blue-collar characters, men who worked, fought, drank, and survived. Be it a lumberman, a grunt in the trenches, or a tired detective, Jaeckel gave all these characters an inherent honesty with whom audiences could easily identify. He was not playing fantasies, he was playing people. And whether on a poster or not, that was what made him irreplaceable. In a city where reinvention is a tenet of survival, Jaeckel held his ground. He never chased trends or fame. He never pretended to be something he was not. He stayed true to his roots with the old-fashioned perseverance that had been his starting point. Down to earth, hardworking, and real. If Hollywood rewards the loudest voices and the flashiest images, Jaeckel carved a niche by patient persistence. He broke into that world not by making demands for attention, but by earning respect. And that only made his presence more potent, even if it never brought him wealth or fame. A life devoted to the work. For Richard Jaeckel, acting was never about celebrity. It was about the work. He approached his craft the way a skilled tradesman might approach carpentry or welding, with discipline, respect, and an eye for detail. While others sought to become stars, Jaeckel sought to become better. He wasn't concerned with headlines or hype. He didn't view a role as a platform for fame, but as a responsibility to the story, to the character, and to the audience. Each time he stepped in front of the camera, he treated it as an opportunity to serve the narrative. That kind of humility is rare in an industry fueled by ego, and it became the cornerstone of Jaeckel's long and steady career. His work ethic was as relentless as it was understated. From the early 1940s until the 1990s, Jaeckel rarely took a break. He kept moving from project to project, sometimes film, sometimes television, often with only a few weeks between gigs. His resume grew to include over 150 credits, but it wasn't just the quantity that was impressive. It was the consistency. No matter how small the part, Jaeckel delivered. He didn't sleepwalk through guest appearances or treat low-budget projects with disdain. He gave the same intensity to a 3-minute role on a television drama as he did to Oscar-nominated performances. That level of commitment wasn't just admirable, it was defining. Recognition was instinctively welcome, but never a goal for Jaeckel. He was nominated for an Academy Award in 1971 for Sometimes a Great Notion, but that did little to change the way he approached work. He didn't take the nomination as an opportunity to leap into more glamorous roles or demand bigger paychecks. Instead, he returned quietly to work, content to create performances that showcased his integrity. In a business that frequently links visibility with success, he stood for substance. Awards, headlines, and prestige held little interest for him. He judged the success of his career against his performances rather than the size of the spotlight cast on him. Richard Jaeckel considered every set before him, humble or otherwise, to be a classroom. Every role stood for yet another opportunity to sharpen his craft, expand his insight, and exercise his imagination. Showing up early to do a big movie or a one-off television episode, he was always prepared, professional, and there. That attitude endeared him to directors and fellow actors alike. To Jaeckel, impact was not contingent on having a trailer bigger than a house or a script rife with monologues. Instead, a good role was all he needed. It is this contrast, craft over celebrity, that he left as his silent legacy. A lifetime devoted not to stardom, but to an honest, unmeasured love for the art of performance. Never the lead, always the core. Richard Jaeckel may have never headlined a blockbuster, but he was often the soul of the story. While others delivered the monologues or graced the posters, Jaeckel played the roles that held the emotional or moral core of a film together. His characters were the ones that gave the audience something real to hold on to. Men hardened by experience, shaped by duty, and caught in the quiet turmoil beneath the surface. In war films, he was the soldier who knew what loss really looked like. In westerns, he was the man who didn't draw first, but always had a reason to. These roles may not have been the most glamorous, but they were often the most essential. Without his steady presence, the story often lost its anchor. Part of Jaeckel's enduring power was his ability to bring realism to films that might have otherwise tipped into spectacle. In action-heavy or ensemble films like The Dirty Dozen, he didn't compete for attention. He grounded the chaos. He had a quiet intensity, a way of occupying space that made every scene feel more authentic. He wasn't flashy, but he was believable, which is why directors trusted him with roles that demanded emotional weight. He didn't just play a character. He gave that character history, scars, and silence. That sense of realism elevated the entire production, making even the most dramatic moments feel rooted in something tangible. Jaeckel had a gift for rendering his insights into representations of internal conflict, which avoided melodrama or exposition. A single moment of guilt, a glance of doubt, the tension between loyalty and fear, all such moments might have slipped through Jaeckel's subtle but even more powerful portrayal. His characters were never constrained by their own limelight. That is, they were free not to speak of feelings which the audience could clearly see. Such subtleness lent greater power to his performances, while the less educated viewers might overlook them, which is where real appreciation grew with those who earned their living through the art. There was in them a certain area for audience interpretation and personal inference. It wasn't so much that he called for emotion, he invited it. Possibly the most significant of all, Jaeckel was responsible for brightening the stars around him. He was the contrast that illuminated a hero's resolve, the conscience that alternately complicated a gray moral tale, or the whisper that reminded you what hung in the balance. He was never an intruder, but always elevated the scenes. His competence, depth, and realness earned leading actors the support they needed to shine in their roles. In this way, Jaeckel was not just part of the background. He was the skeleton on which the narrative rested. He might not have always been the star, but he was always, quite indubitably, at the center. Hollywood's changing landscape. As the decades rolled on, Hollywood began to transform into a different kind of machine, one that prized spectacle over story, marketing over meaning. During the mid to late 20th century, when Richard Jaeckel was at the height of his career, films were often built around character, nuance, and emotional complexity. He thrived in that environment, embodying the kinds of roles that required lived-in authenticity. But by the 1980s and 1990s, a noticeable shift had taken hold. Big-budget blockbusters dominated the box office, filled with dazzling visual effects, explosive set pieces, and increasingly younger casts. Grit gave way to gloss, and realism was replaced by fantasy. Jaeckel, a craftsman rooted in truth and restraint, didn't fit that new mold, and he didn't try to. Studios and producers began prioritizing youth, aesthetics, and media presence over depth and experience. Casting decisions were increasingly influenced by an actor's marketability rather than their range or reliability. The rise of celebrity culture meant that actors were now expected to maintain a public image, one shaped as much by their off-screen persona as their on-screen talent. Jaeckel, with his modest lifestyle and disinterest in self-promotion, wasn't equipped or willing to compete in that arena. He didn't chase magazine covers, didn't cultivate a personal brand, and rarely appeared on talk shows or in tabloids. In a world where visibility became a currency, Jaeckel's quiet professionalism made him all but invisible. When computer-generated imagery, CGI, started taking over practical effects, and when complex characters became sidelined in lieu of shiny heroes, Jaeckel's earthy style became less and less marketable. Superhero movies and high-concept franchises are not generally where actors like him would fit. Neither are the eroding numbers of gritty, character-driven dramas where he excels. And, where once such realism set him immediately apart, now it seemed an anachronism in a wholly escapist film world. Directors who depended on the likes of him for authenticity were now asked to consider potential entertainment value and franchise instead. He was still in the game, but opportunities shrank and roles became smaller. Change, however, never tempted Jaeckel to reinvent himself in line with the new direction being taken by the industry. Other words, he did not chase trendy roles or seek to modernize his image. He remained true to the kind of work he believed in, even if that meant being left behind. There's something admirable, almost heroic, in that choice. Although rejecting compromise to remain relevant, he kept his religious identity intact. While others adapted to survive, Jaeckel remained loyal to the version of Hollywood that had once embraced him, and in doing so made himself a living reminder of a dying age, a time when skill counted for so much more than style, and when substance was never an option. As the spotlight shifted and the noise grew louder, what happened next revealed just how unforgiving that silence could become. Loyalty with limits. Richard Jaeckel's career was a study in loyalty. Loyalty to the craft, to the role, and to an industry that ultimately showed him none in return. For decades, he gave Hollywood everything: consistency, professionalism, and performances that added weight and credibility to every project he touched. He wasn't difficult on set, never made headlines for bad behavior, and never embarrassed the studios he worked for. And yet, as he aged, that same industry quietly moved on without him. There was no scandal that drove him out, no public falling out with producers or directors. He simply stopped getting the calls. It was a slow, vanishing act, not because he failed, but because he no longer fit the industry's narrow, evolving idea of who mattered. What made Jaeckel's fade from the spotlight so tragic was not how abrupt it was, but how indifferent it seemed. After decades of steady work and more than 150 film and television credits, the industry that had once relied on his face and his presence didn't offer a farewell or even a nod. No final roles to cap off his legacy. No celebratory career retrospectives. No honors for lifetime achievement. While younger, flashier stars continued to headline films and earn tribute reels, Jaeckel's contributions went largely unacknowledged. Hollywood simply stopped finding a place for him, revealing the limits of its loyalty to actors who refuse to demand attention. Jaeckel never went on record to complain about being left out. He did not give any bitter interviews or write any scandalous books to berate the industry that had forgotten him. It just wasn't his style. He simply stayed dignified in silence until the parts dried up, and with them went most of the visibility. But that silence spoke one loud truth. In Hollywood, those who don't blow their own trumpet are often the very first to be forgotten. Within a superficial and attention-seeking system, humility became a burden for Jaeckel. He trusted the work to speak for itself. But the moment the industry stopped listening, he simply got left behind without protest or fanfare. His story is a sobering reminder that even an entire lifetime dedicated to the craft may not carve a way into people's minds forever. The entertainment industry is full of stars in ascendance. It keeps a good distance from those that nourish it on a longer timeline. Richard Jaeckel's fade did not come on account of moral failure or lack of talent. It came down to an industry that could not recognize silent excellence. His career proved that loyal service can have a limit, especially in an industry that hardly ever remembers those who never have the courage to ask for it, but ought to have always remembered them. The financial illusion. Despite appearing in more than 150 films and television shows across 5 decades, Richard Jaeckel's career did not translate into financial security. While audiences may assume that such an extensive body of work would result in wealth and comfort, Jaeckel's reality was far different. He was a working actor in the truest sense, consistently employed, but never commanding the kinds of salaries that padded retirement accounts or guaranteed long-term stability. He didn't chase high-paying endorsement deals or cultivate a personal brand to supplement his income. Instead, he relied entirely on the work itself, and when the work stopped, so did the paychecks. For someone who had contributed so much to Hollywood's golden years, the absence of a financial safety net was not only troubling, it was deeply unfair. Jaeckel lived modestly throughout his career, never succumbing to the trappings of celebrity. While others built empires with side ventures, licensing deals, or real estate portfolios, he focused solely on acting. He didn't leverage his limited fame into business ventures or public appearances. He never pursued the lucrative speaking circuit, rarely gave interviews, and didn't publish a memoir. For him, it was always about the role, not the revenue. That integrity, while admirable, left him vulnerable in an industry that rarely offers pensions or protection to those who aren't top-billed stars. His humble lifestyle mirrored his work ethic. No frills, no flash, just commitment to the job. Unfortunately, that quiet approach provided no cushion when his health began to decline. The financial state turned awry for Jaeckel when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer in the early 1990s. Medical bills started piling up, and without work or spare cash, the onus shifted to his family. There were neither stipends from the union nor a health scheme funded by the industry that could cover anything amounting to the cost of care. Finally, Jaeckel was moved to the Motion Picture and Television Fund Home, meant for aged and sick laborers in the entertainment industry. The place was comforting and dignified, yet that relocation starkly showed the few avenues for structural support existing for the working-class actors today, even having spent a lifetime in an admired and respectable career. The industry that formerly lent Jaeckel's face credibility to its tales could now provide very little apart from silence. Jaeckel's downfall financially acted like a mirror to the systemic failure in the Hollywood treatment of its labor. Indeed, there are throngs of Jaeckel equivalents, selective actors, committed, hard-working, and courageously facing the last years of their lives with little resources that walk around between any A-list face with financial advisors who left with numerous revenue streams. His story deconstructs the myths of visibility resulting in wealth and highlights just how fragile the lives of those in artistic professions are. Fame is not fortune, as Jaeckel's life showed. In fact, it came with no safety at all. A dying light. Richard Jaeckel's entire identity was rooted in work. For over 5 decades, he showed up on film and television sets with quiet professionalism, treating every role, no matter how small, with care and discipline. Acting wasn't just a job for him, it was a way of life, a constant rhythm that defined his purpose. But when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer in the early 1990s, that rhythm came to a sudden halt. The phone stopped ringing. The auditions stopped coming. The man who had spent his entire adult life moving from one set to the next was now confined not by choice, but by the physical limits of his failing body. It marked not just the end of his career, but the erasure of his public identity, as if Hollywood had simply forgotten he had ever been there. His exit from the industry was as quiet as his entry. There were no retirement announcements, no farewell interviews, no press releases honoring a life in film. For someone who had appeared in more than 150 roles and received an Academy Award nomination, the silence was deafening. His decline occurred largely out of sight, without public recognition or professional acknowledgement. Colleagues didn't rally around him. Studios he'd once worked with issued no statements. The entertainment press, so often quick to spotlight health battles of well-known figures, offered barely a whisper. In an industry that loves a dramatic exit, Richard Jaeckel's departure was striking in its invisibility. As the disease progressed, Jaeckel began to suffer from the dual onslaughts of physical and mental pain. This brought him gradual weight loss and an inability to remember clearly, including perhaps eventually losing that sharp focus he once brought to each role. Even with a decline that seemed pretty severe, little evidence existed that the industry he had so faithfully served for so many decades seemed to take notice. No tributes, no coverage, no actual concern, no spot at the award shows or film festivals. In an honest-to-God tribute to classic American cinema, not a peep about his name. It was as if that contribution, subtle, consistent, and crucial, was too small a thing to carry its weight right into the last years of his life. That silence was more than personal. It was institutional. That public indifference at the time of his illness brought to the point the ugly fact of Hollywood's very selective memory. Jaeckel's decline should have stirred some recognition in the minds of cronies about what he had done, or at least some empathy from the industry that thrives on telling stories. Yet, as if scripted, his last chapter was written in almost total obscurity. His life's work, so much taken in the cause of other people, was done without a worthwhile public acknowledgement of his efforts. For someone who has carried many narratives in his life, it is painful irony that his own would be muffled in such a way. Quiet support in final days. As Richard Jaeckel's health declined and the industry remained silent, a different kind of support quietly began to emerge from the people who truly remembered him. While there were no national headlines or star-studded fundraisers, a trickle of letters, donations, and heartfelt messages started to arrive from longtime fans and former collaborators. These weren't grand gestures designed for publicity. They were deeply personal acknowledgments from those who had been moved by his work. Fans who had grown up watching his war films and westerns sent handwritten notes expressing their admiration, gratitude, and sorrow. Some even included small donations to help with his medical costs, simple, sincere acts of kindness that spoke volumes. What made this support so powerful was its intimacy. Former co-stars and directors who had worked with Jaeckel over the years began to contribute quietly, without seeking recognition or media attention. They remembered the man behind the characters, the professional who showed up on time, hit his marks, and never asked for more than he needed. Their contributions, often anonymous or passed through personal channels, weren't driven by obligation, but by genuine respect. They didn't need cameras or interviews to validate their gratitude. Instead, they gave what they could, hoping it might ease the burden for a man who had given so much and asked for so little. Until Hollywood finally acknowledged him, Jaeckel's last chapter was to be rendered emotionally substantial through the medium of the masses rather than the press. No glossy tributes or televised specials were held, but the fans remembered. They would speak about his scenes on forums, watch his films on late-night television, and hand down stories of that actor who always felt real. People would quietly, with almost reverent melancholy, say his name, reflecting on his depth, his humanity, and an unshakable sense of truth on screen. As far as they were concerned, he had not left. He had simply become a quiet part of the legacy they carried with them, film by film. If anything, these vignettes, rather artificial under Hollywood's gauze, suggested a different legacy, dependent not upon celebrity but upon respect. Jaeckel got little by way of showbiz honors or applause in his last days, but perhaps the greatest blessing of them all: genuine recognition from those who truly ought to know him. In turn, it was not Hollywood that supported him in those last days. It was those who had not forgotten him. It was then that his life's work became clear in value, not by the accolades he never received, but through the legacy of love he left behind for the people he touched, one role at a time. While the industry moved on, what remains speaks louder than any tribute ever could. Legacy without applause. Richard Jaeckel may not be a name that echoes through award show montages or Hollywood retrospectives, but his work remains quietly foundational to the fabric of classic American cinema. His performances, marked by subtlety and emotional realism, are essential to understanding how authenticity shaped the golden era of film. Jaeckel didn't act to be seen. He acted to be believed. He brought characters to life not through grand gestures, but through honest, lived-in portrayals that made audiences feel they were watching a real person, not a scripted role. From his early days in Guadalcanal Diary to his unforgettable turn in Sometimes a Great Notion, he helped define the tone and texture of working-class realism on screen. His story also raises important questions about how Hollywood defines, and more importantly, rewards, greatness. Why are some names etched into film history, while others fade into obscurity, regardless of the weight of their contributions? Jaeckel's consistent excellence never translated into legacy awards, star treatment, or lifetime achievement honors. He didn't fit the mold of a traditional celebrity. He didn't sell headlines, and he didn't chase the spotlight. And yet, his presence made countless films stronger, more grounded, and more human. In examining his career, we are forced to confront an industry that often overlooks the people who hold its stories together in favor of those who simply shout the loudest. Another aspect of his extraordinary life that people rarely know or appreciate is honesty. If Richard Jaeckel's story moved you, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear which role you remember him from. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's forgotten legends. And if you want to dive deeper, click on the next video on your screen. It's one you won't want to miss.